Religious people need to stop giving money to bribe lobbyists into making discriminatory laws. Any time a religious group tries to pass laws that make it harder for non-religious or non-hetero people to live their lives is a violation of state and religious laws. The Supreme Court's interpretation of Everson versus the Board of Education in 1947 solidified the wall of separation metaphor, emphasizing the need of a clear divide between church and state influencing each other in a negative light. The extent and application of the wall of separation is continued to be debated by the best in society, the most educated, the people that deal with the legalities of this. The Supreme Court also developed tests like the Lemon test, which came from Lemon versus Kurtzman, 1971, to assess the constitutionality of government actions related to religion, ensuring that they have a secular purpose, neither to promote nor inhibit religion, and does not excessively entangle the church and state. In essence, the separation of church and state is a fundamental principle that seeks to balance religious freedom with the need for a secular government that does not favor or disfavor any particular religion. And when people don't understand the separation of church and state, they don't understand how our country started. Our country was started by people fleeing from countries that did not have the separation of church and state. It's rather ironic that we're now trying to tear this down. The founding fathers, the pilgrims, they all wanted to worship the way they wanted. The problem with the pilgrims, well, not really with the pilgrims, but the pilgrims' ancestors, is their ancestors tried to tear that down. If you've ever read certain classics like The Scarlet Letter, Silas Marner, you see very puritanical communities in the East Coast, the original 13 colonies, that punished people under the law for not praying, attending church, donating money. Basically, being a human being was punishable under their religious laws. And that's the problem. I have no problem with a Christian being president. Just don't bring your religion into the Oval Office. Every law that is lobbied or signed needs to be for the betterment of the existing or soon to be coming into the world citizens. If a law doesn't give the quality of life to everyone, it should not be the law. If everyone isn't treated equally under a law, it should be abolished. If somebody wants to lobby for something to become law that discriminates against people who aren't white, it's against the state and church separation clause. If people want to create laws that discriminate against white and heterosexual people for any reason, that is a human rights violation. Even though in some ways it might be karma for how their group treats other people, it's still wrong. And you can do a simple Google search. What court cases established, maintained, and addressed how we see separation of church and state today? It wasn't just one case, it was a lot of cases. The problem with organized high control religion is it's not enough that they choose with bodily consent to believe it themselves. They have to force their kids to believe it. They have to force the community to live by it. Then they want to force the federal government to live by it. It's a never-ending thing. And if they can't get their government to believe it, endorse it, and enforce it, they donate money to places in Africa and Asia where they can use their money to get gay people arrested. It's always a racist, sexist, homophobic reason. Christians, fundamentalists, they have to have the law of the land, Christian, to maintain their superiority, their privilege. Because the Bible says nothing bad about racism, slavery, sexism. The Bible just tells you how to morally commit slavery, how to morally take what you want. And the separation of church and state is so important because it sets a precedence of the government can't use religion to further their influence, but the religions, the churches can't use their religion to get what they want done in government. Government should be sterile of religious meaning, religious anything. Every law, every time we vote, we should vote thinking. What I'm voting for or against, is it making everyone equal? Is it giving everyone equal opportunity? Is it upholding the value, dignity, and autonomy of women? Is it keeping certain groups in check that want to hurt and rule over other groups? Does this law keep the 1% in their place? If you want to sign something into law and vote for something in your city that will oppress, discriminate, and target people you believe are morally inferior, this is a violation of the separation of church and state. Because the worst groups of American violence and hate groups have conservative Christian backing, either in influence, money, lobbying. They're always backed by the Christian privilege. Why did the MAGA get Trump into the White House? Because they deep down believe their whiteness, their Christian right needs to be forced on everyone so they can be the elite. And Christianity does a great job in keeping privileged people in privilege because it doesn't condone what the privileged people are doing. It just tells people who aren't privileged to be godly by obeying the privileged. And even though Thomas Jefferson wanted to include slavery was wrong, he had to remove it. The American government, the 13 colonies, would not have been united if slavery had been abolished. Half of the 13 original colonies wouldn't have joined the United States if slavery wasn't allowed. That's why slavery existed for another 100 years. The United States never would have happened if slavery had initially been abolished. The separation of church and state is so important. If you haven't watched or read The Handmaid's Tale, it's a wonderful, encompassing insight into why separation of church and state is vital. Because when religion becomes the government, or the government uses religion for absolute control, you get the Handmaid's Tale. Christians and religious people, instead of lobbying for more laws to discriminate, why don't you take care of the people outside your doors? Use the money to give to people for a better quality life instead of using the money to discriminate against people. But if the church did that, they wouldn't be privileged anymore, because if everyone's equal, there's no privilege. And the separation of church and state, even though it's a philosophical and jurisprudential concept for political distancing between religion and the state, the conception of this term is ever-changing. It's a former relationship between church and state. The concept originated during early Baptists in America. In 1644, Roger Williams, the Baptist minister and founder of the state of Rhode Island, and the first Baptist church in America, was the first public official to call for a wall or hedge of separation between the wilderness of the world. I find that ironic. The founder of the First Baptist Church in America, which the Baptist Convention is one of the biggest support groups of Trump. They gave a lot of money, influence, and focus to get Trump in the White House, even though the founder didn't want anything but separation of church and state. And the concept is promoted by basically every Enlightenment philosophers, like John Locke, who is considered in the top 1,000 people who ever lived. And in my opinion, we need to widen the gap, not close it. We need to have federal laws in the land that say it's illegal for parents to opt out of things in church or in public. Well, let me correct myself. We need government, federal and state laws and precedents in the Constitution of every state and on the federal level that makes it illegal and unconstitutional for people, parents especially, to opt out for their kids' knowledge that is required to graduate. If you want to use the excuse the child is sick, there's not much we can do. But it should not be legal for parents to remove their kids from school because they don't like or agree with what's being taught. What will happen if you allow it, which has recently been allowed in the US, is 90% of the class won't be there when racism is being taught. And you're harming children when you remove them from learning about uncomfortable but very real things that are still going on today in the US and abroad. Kids will grow up never understanding how minorities feel. They won't understand their own sexuality and orientation, even if they're straight. And toxic masculinity is the byproduct of people not growing up with a healthy understanding of sexual orientation. The philosophies of separation of church and states parallels philosophies of secularism, and people who want the right privilege want to keep separation of church and state, destroy it entirely, or bring it so close together there is little to no difference.